Windows is dying. Very slowly, and it is still the market leader, but it has steadily been losing share for almost 15 years now, going down from 95% to the low 60s worldwide. Meanwhile, macOS is now stable at over 20% usage share, and even Chrome OS and Desktop Linux comfortably sit above 3% each. Worse yet, in less price-sensitive markets like the US, consumer preference for Apple is even stronger, with well over 30% of consumers now using a Mac. And this whole shift happened while the PC market as a whole has started to decline too. Apart from a temporary peak driven by the pandemic-era work-from-home boom, sales of PCs have been steadily decreasing since 2011. In other words, Microsoft's operating system has a declining share of a declining market. So where did they drop the ball, and how are they planning to turn things around? Can the newly announced Snapdragon chip, or maybe their big bet on AI, really save them? Let's find out. This video was sponsored by ModMic, the wireless magnetic microphone to level up your audio. In 2010, Steven Sinofsky, then the head of Windows, watched Steve Jobs reveal the company's third big product, the iPad. His initial reaction was confusion. As he since admitted on his blog, Microsoft leaders did expect to see a tablet at the event, but they thought that it would be a macOS tablet centered around a digital stylus that cost at least $1,000, similar to a MacBook Air back then. The iPad was none of those things, which put some serious doubts into Microsoft. At the time of this announcement, Windows was actually a better business than ever due to the successful launch of Windows 7. Just Windows alone made over $18 billion in revenue in 2010, with incredible operating margins of 70%, meaning that it was more profitable than all of Apple combined. Windows was an incredible profit-generating machine at its very peak, but despite this, Microsoft felt more unsure about the future of computing and about their role in it than ever. The company was clearly losing the smartphone race, which threatened to overtake PCs as people's primary computing platforms, while even on PCs, the majority of innovative new apps were no longer built around some Windows app framework, but rather as web apps running on just about any platform. And now here was Apple claiming that they invented the next big form factor as well. Sinofsky in his blog called this Microsoft's BlackBerry moment, implying that they were the dinosaurs before the asteroid hit. Unless they radically reinvented it, Windows would just eventually get relegated to the past, and given that back then, every major Microsoft business, from Office to MSN and more, was tied to Windows' success, risking that was simply not an option. So for the next decade or so, Microsoft tried really hard to reinvent Windows, but not only did they fail, their attempts to reinvent the wheel actually made things worse, creating a pattern of 4 consistent steps. Step 1. A new technology, like the iPad, appears that Microsoft thinks has the potential to become the future of computing. Step 2. Microsoft, who feels that Windows is falling behind, decides to go all in on rebuilding their operating system to compete against this new entrant. In the case of the iPad, this was done by turning the whole operating system into a quasi-tablet interface, locking users into full-screen apps, etc. But then, Step 3, the transition actually flops. Turning a desktop operating system into a tablet one is ultra hard, plus Microsoft has to rush this transition, and their partners are really slow to adapt. Intel never made a chip that could compete on tablets, and app developers were really slow to port their apps over to Microsoft's Touch UI 2, so the whole project just falls apart. And meanwhile, Step 4, the radical changes actually end up annoying regular Windows users who just want to keep using their PC as a PC. So all this new stuff just gets in the way and eventually has to be ripped out of Windows again. And so at the end of this 4-step cycle, Microsoft spent years working on something that not only didn't make Windows better on the long term, but actually often made it worse afterwards, as the big push leaves behind lots of things that eventually become random legacy bloat. I think Windows 8 was kind of the original sin here, the first version of this terrible cycle, but then for the next decade or so, Microsoft kept repeating it again and again. Here are a few examples. Step 1. VR becomes a thing with Oculus and HTC Vive. Microsoft thinks, hey, this could become a big deal. So Step 2. Microsoft goes all in on mixed reality. They make Windows 10 able to run a HoloLens, a straight-up futuristic AR headset, and every Windows version on the PC gets a whole mixed reality platform built in. You just plug a compatible headset in and it works. And not only that, Windows itself becomes 3D too. Paint 3D launches so users can create and browse 3D objects, every Office app gets 3D capabilities, and even Microsoft's default app framework gets a 3D redesign. This means glass-like textures, 3D shadows, and a glowing cursor, similar to how VR controllers highlight where you point to. This is because all your desktop apps are supposed to also be rendered in mixed reality as kind of 3D objects too. Step 3, Windows Mixed Reality basically flops. I mean, personally, I thought that their VR headsets worked really great, plus the HoloLens is still technically around, but the vast majority of the world does not need Windows to be a mixed reality operating system. Step 4, Microsoft spends years ripping out as much of this 3D and mixed reality stuff out of Windows as they can, and leaves the rest that it cannot remove around as basically bloat. The cycle is complete, and here comes the next one. Step 1, Chrome OS starts getting popular with enterprise and educational consumers due to being lightweight and easy to keep secure. So step 2, Microsoft reacts by creating Windows 10s, a version of Windows that only allows users to install apps that Microsoft declares to be safe. And to show that they are serious, they even ship this by default on some Surface devices. Step 3, it's a complete flop. 10s can't compete with Chrome OS on low-end hardware because it's still full-fat Windows underneath, its Edge browser is also inferior to Chrome, and it confuses users who randomly bought a Surface by telling them that they can't install their usual apps on their new computer. Step 4, after just 1 year, Microsoft kills the operating system and has to undo everything, leaving it only as an optional switch for enterprise users that barely any of them still use.
Okay, ready for one last example?
Step 1, foldables become an exciting new category. Step 2, Microsoft builds the Surface Neo and creates a massive rewrite of its operating system called Windows 10X for dual-screen devices. Step 3, this flops. The operating system is rushed, Intel's chips still suck on thin and light devices more than a decade after the iPad got launched, and the interest from app developers for dual-screen form factors on Windows is basically non-existent. Step 4, Microsoft completely scraps the operating system and the hardware before even releasing it. At least some of the design of 10X actually gets ported over to become Windows 11 on regular PCs, but the majority of the work behind the project basically just gets thrown away.
I could go on with the examples, but I think the pattern is blindingly obvious once you see it. Microsoft, for about a decade now, has been trying and failing to turn Windows into something completely new.
A tablet OS, a mixed reality OS, a dual-screen OS, a competitor to Chrome OS, etc., and they were spinning around in circles as they did and undid each one of these. Meanwhile, their competitors just quietly worked on mostly getting better at doing computer stuff and could spend their resources on, for example, building better chips for their computers.
This is not to say that there haven't been any major improvements to Windows in all this time. Of course there have been, but in this light, I actually find it surprising that they haven't lost more share than they have, and it shows just how sticky platforms can be.
Now, Windows 11, I think, is the first version of Windows since 2009 that actually breaks this pattern. This release has not introduced any new computing paradigms, but instead has primarily focused on refining the actual core PC experience. This includes cleaning out decades of old user interface inconsistencies across the desktop, like old context menus, and cleaning up the System Settings app. It includes a general visual modernization of the operating system, and it includes finally giving core new features to the inbox apps too. File Explorer getting tabs, Notepad getting autosave, Snipping Tool being able to record videos, Paint getting layers, and finally being able to handle transparent images, etc. These are all very much obvious desktop improvements that Microsoft should have built a decade ago, but finally just got to under Windows 11.
This acceptance, I think, is a factor of the rest of Microsoft completely outgrowing Windows, and that means that the company no longer has to try to make this poor operating system carry the entire organization forward on its own. But now that the focus is back, the next question is whether Windows can actually gain back some of the market share that they've lost. And I think for that, they need to figure out two concrete things.
First is chips. Since 2020, Apple's self-designed ARM-based M-series chips gave it a massive power efficiency and performance advantage, especially on thin and light laptops. These incredible chips have, at least in part, contributed to macOS's rapid rise in places like the US, and so Windows needs to at least match them if they want to stop the bleeding. Maybe Intel and AMD will step up to do that task, but the newest hope is that ARM chips will do the trick for Windows, just like they did for macOS, except on Windows we might actually get some real competition here. First, Qualcomm has just announced their new Snapdragon X series chips in Hawaii, and they claim that these are exactly the chips that Windows laptops especially have been waiting for. The CPUs are designed by many of the same people who designed Apple's M series chips. They are custom designed based on ARM, just like the M series, and Qualcomm showed a bunch of benchmarks at their event where they thoroughly beat everyone from Apple to Intel and AMD on performance and power efficiency as well. Now we'll have to wait for third-party tests to see if these cherry-picked benchmarks actually hold any water, but this at least is one promising option. And then, while Qualcomm had an exclusive deal with Microsoft for ARM chips, that deal seems to be expiring any day now, and we're already getting rumors that Nvidia and AMD are planning to make ARM-based Windows chips too. MediaTek has already started working on their PC chips, including apparently ones that you can pair with a dedicated Nvidia graphics card, and I see no reason why Samsung and Huawei, for example, wouldn't at least consider this as well.
When Windows could basically only run on x86 chips, that meant that only Intel and AMD could make the processors for Windows. Those are the only two companies that have the licenses for it. But basically anyone can make ARM chips, so I hope there will be real competition soon. And while the chips hopefully figure themselves out, Microsoft also needs to make sure that they figure out how to make their operating system, and especially apps, run better on Windows on ARM. Because especially in the beginning, the software side of things has been pretty unimpressive.
To see how far Windows on ARM has come as a platform so far, I actually asked Lenovo to send me their most current Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3 powered PC ahead of the Qualcomm event, and here are my thoughts on the platform. On the plus side, this chip and the ThinkPad gets me the same incredible 8 to 12 hours of real-world battery life, and the same completely cool fanless ultra thin and light experience as my M1 MacBook Air. And while the raw performance can't exactly match the Mac, the system itself and most of the apps were actually super responsive. I even got the same generative AI features in Photoshop, for example, that I get on the Mac due to this Snapdragon chip having an NPU or a dedicated AI processor on board, just like the Mac.
So that's a significantly better baseline than I expected, but 6 years in, Windows on ARM still has a significant app problem.
Here's a list of apps that I tried running on the platform, and they fall into 4 categories. The best ones are compiled natively for ARM. These run basically flawlessly. I happen to use many of these apps basically daily, so for me this is a surprisingly decent selection. Next are apps like Slack, Discord, and Notion, which don't have a native ARM version, but since their desktop apps are basically just websites pretending to be apps anyway, you can save their web versions as apps from Microsoft Edge, and you probably won't even notice the difference. They work great. Type 3 are the apps that can only run in emulation. These technically work, and I'm super happy that many of them are here because there are no easy alternatives to them in some cases, but they are a little bit less responsive than the native ones. I find this performance completely acceptable for simple apps like the Signal desktop app or maybe Audacity, but more complex apps like Chrome are simply not enjoyable long term. And Type 4 are the really complex apps that require specific hardware optimizations, like many video editing programs or intensive games, which often simply do not run at all.
Hey, Editor Martin here. While I was working on this video, the news came out that DaVinci Resolve from Blackmagic is going to come natively to the Windows on ARM platform. Previously, you basically couldn't even open the app at all on Windows on ARM, so I think this is a pretty good sign that at least some of the bigger app makers are taking the Windows on ARM platform a little bit more seriously now that we have better, more powerful Snapdragon chips and so on. So fingers crossed that we get better support soon. Okay, and now back to the rest of the video.
Now, there are tons of rumors and job postings hinting at next year's Windows 12 being all about improving ARM support, but for now there are still too many trade-offs for this to be a truly mass-market platform.
The direction is good though, and if we can get it good enough, then Windows on ARM, together with better chips, could stop plenty of people from switching away from Windows. But beside that, Microsoft would also have to find a compelling reason to make people switch back to Windows too. And for now, they seem to be pretty convinced that that will be AI features.
They have already teased their plans to cram AI into every corner of the operating system, every app, and every service that they have. AI is their next big Hail Mary, and for once, I think they might actually be well set to succeed with it. Unlike with other tech trends, Microsoft is actually kind of ahead of the curve with AI and is not rushing to catch up with a competitor. They are the largest shareholder of OpenAI at 49%, and they have exclusive access to their products. They have already built multiple successful AI applications, such as GitHub Copilot, which millions of people use daily. They own more productivity apps and services, from Office to VS Code and more, that would definitely all benefit from AI integrations if done well, and for once I think all of these AI features are a trend that actually makes sense to be integrated into the PC platform. People naturally turn to their PCs to do a lot of creative work, writing, coding, data crunching, etc. And so having AI help with these tasks could actually make a whole lot of sense.
Will AI be a big deal for Windows? I don't know, but I guess it has better chances of succeeding than Windows turning into a tablet OS, so that's a start. Let me know in the comments if you think they have a chance, but before that, I have a little secret to share.
For this whole video, the entire voiceover part that you've been listening to was recorded with this really unique microphone called the ModMic. This is a wireless microphone that you can magnetically attach to almost any pair of headphones to make yourself sound incredible. You just stick one of the 4 stickers that you get in the box on your headphones, then you plug your USB receiver into your computer, and bada bing bada boom, high quality audio for your Zoom calls and your gaming sessions. Of course, for the voiceover part, I applied a little bit of processing to the audio as I do with any microphone here in the studio. Here's what this microphone sounds like without any processing applied to it. And by the way, you might be hearing that I'm still a little bit sick. That's in my voice as well. But I bet that for the most part, I guess the majority of you did not notice that I wasn't using my regular studio microphones in this video. Besides the sound quality, you also get 12 hours of battery life, a dedicated mute button, and a super high quality Bluetooth connection. I recorded for 60 minutes straight for this video, and I did not have a single dropout in that time. Better yet, while this microphone is already pretty affordable at around $140 depending on your region, with my link that is in the description and the code TA15, you will even get a 15% discount on top of that on their products. Now beside that, the company also has these incredible in-ear monitors that you're listening to right now, because these have a microphone and they sound fantastic. Oh, and get this, the microphone is also removable. How cool is that? I love a sponsor where you can just demonstrate the quality this easily, and so if you want to sound this good, be sure to use my link that is in the description and also the code TA15, and I'll see you in the next video.